Hi, comrades. Much love and much respect to you. Um, I thought what I'd do is come back on the back of my video of Yo Yes, the reading of that. And I know your brilliant teacher, um, comrade of mine, has been um, introducing that to you, and I know you've had some incredible, brilliant talks and conversations about that. So I thought what I would do is maybe just follow on a little bit, right? Just continue that story a little bit for a few minutes. But first, what I want to say is much love and much respect to you. I hope right now, this moment, where you're at, where you're sitting right now, this week, whenever you're taking this up, finds you in a place of peace and happiness, and I wish that for your families. So let me start. We left off, right? You left off, right, with yeah, right? Z and T going out, yeah, right? So it got me thinking about, what comes after Yao, right? So I imagine both of them, right, going off after that Yao moment, right? Hand in hand, jumping up, right? And resisting all pressures, right? All pressures on them, right? All oppressions, right? Everything's putting them down, keeping them down, resisting all of that. I'm gonna be who we want to be, right? On our terms, right? But then they're on the street again now, right? And they're on the street amongst community, right? And what I imagine is Z and T going out now together, right? Comrades, right? And I'll come back to that in a little bit, that word, right? And everybody's walking around, what they see Z and T see around, and everybody's walking around like zombies, right? And they're hurting, right? And everybody's hurting, right? And so they figure out that, we got to change this, right? Everyone's walking around like zombies. And it's not because they ain't zombies, right? Because they are, but because everybody's just dead inside, right? So zombies everywhere, right? But they're just dead inside, right? So it's like on the street, everyone's walking around like T was, right? All hunched up and unhappy. And everyone's hurting and they're all barking and biting at each other, right? On the subway, right? On the street, wherever they're at, right? And they don't mean, right, to bark and bite, right? And to hurt each other. It's just like they're tired, right? They're tired of living in fear, right? And all everyone does is work and eat and then sleep and eat and sleep and work for jobs, right? That have little money, right? That don't make you happy, right? They don't make you fulfilled, right? And that's just to pay the rent, right? And the rent is so high, so everybody's hurting in so many different ways, right? And the real mean zombies, right? The real mean zombies are the big orange ones, right? With the yellow hair that's controlling everything, right? Controlling their lives, right? Owning everything, right? Evicting everyone, kicking everybody out on the street, right? So everybody's got nothing and everybody's feeling in a sense of fear, or people, right? The zombies, right? Are feeling fearful because they might have nothing. They might be on the street, right? And everybody's working till they drop, right? For nothing again, right? So it's like Z and T, right? Have woken up, right? They're woke up, right? But no one else has, right? So they both figure, we got to do something about this, right? But how, right? So okay, so maybe how about then we go out and talk to everyone, right? And find out what they want and what they need, right? So Z and T, right? Both of them, they head out, right? and they meet and they talk to zombies on the street. They meet and talk to zombies in shops, in cafes, on the subway, right? In the neighborhood. And you know what it's like on the subway, right? You know, everybody's in a place of fear, right? Holding each other like that, barking and biting, right? You know, like this, right? Even the slightest nudge, right? That's fear, right? Right? And then you walk down and you walk home and you sleep and you come back, right? You know, we got to change that, right? Right? And then meet people in the schoolyards, right? Right? Waiting for buses, coming home from work, right? And then meet people and talk to people even in their homes, right? Right? Even those that are sleeping on the streets and in parks or under bridges, right? That's because of the big, right, mean, right, orange zombies, right? You know. And at first, it's a bit like that first meeting, you know, between Z and T. Like, you know, you, yeah, me, huh? Well, and there's like this gap between them. But once soon, right? Once they feel there's a sense of trust, right? You know, they start to talk, right? Right. And wherever and whenever, you know, they are, everyone, it's all the same. They talk about how they want, all they want is freedom, right? They just want to be free, right? Free not to have to work till you drop for nothing, right? You know, freedom to be free of, freedom that means being free of not having to worry that this is going to happen to your family, right? You know, they start to talk about how, you know, they want free housing, right? You know, they want the freedom to dream, right? You know, to live in peace, right? You know, freedom from evictions, freedom from homelessness, right? You know, to have free food, right? You know, to have access to everything, right? That makes your life fulfilling, right? You know. So when they get back then, Z and T, right? You know, they say, you know, okay, we've got all this, right? You know, we've got all this from the zombie people, right? Our zombie community, right? You know, we got to do something, right? And, you know, right? Everybody's barking and biting, right? You know, everybody's dead inside. And that's just how the orange zombies like it, right? You know, and the orange zombies, right? You know, people don't call them, everyone doesn't call them the orange zombies. They call the OZs, right? You know, and that's what the OZs want, right? You know, okay. So we got to start something. We got to fight back. We got to start our own. How about we start our own self-defense group, right? Right? Because we got to get everybody to unify, right? To come together, right? We got to bring all zombies together, right? 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 If we do that, the OZs can't do nothing, right? You know, we got to move our people to defend themselves, right? We got to lead, right? So, okay, where do we start? How about then we start our own group, right? Says Z, right? You know, okay, what's it gonna be? What's the name gonna be? What about the Zombie Defense Party, says T? Yeah, okay, the ZDP is the real MVP. I like that. Okay, cool. So we need a logo. How about a logo, right? Okay, so we want a logo, right? The people can see it, right? As soon as they see it, right? They know what we're about, right? They know what we stand for, right? Okay, so how about a panther? Says T, right? Okay, yeah, okay, says Z, yeah, okay. So a panther, right? A panther's fierce, right? A panther's got claws, right? We'll have it with claws and with teeth, right? But a panther is proud, right? It's fierce, but it is proud, right? Stands up for itself, right? Stands up for its people, right? Yeah, okay. So Z and C then start to think about the conversations they've had, right? You know, that's there. We've got the logo. We've got the name. What about the conversations, right? And you'll see here, right? Panther. This is all my work here, right? Some of my work, right? You know, we can talk about that another time. I'll bring that in, some of the work, and I'll talk about that later, all right? So we've got the logo. We've got the name. Okay, so where do we go from here? Okay. So maybe, says Z, we can put what the people were saying into some kind of point form, right? So like 10 points, right? And that can be like our platform, right? Right? You know, what we stand for, right? And if everybody knows that, right, then everybody, right, can come together. We can all come together and organize ourselves around that, right? And unify ourselves around that, become a collective around that, right? Everybody will know then what we stand for and what they stand for, right? So, okay, cool. So how about them? We have 10 points, right? We have what we want, right? We break it down to what we want and what we believe, right? Yeah? What we want and what we believe. Okay. So what's the first point, right? Thinking about the talk, right? Freedom. Okay. So let's write this down, okay? We want freedom, okay? Okay, we want freedom. First thing. What about we believe? Okay. We want freedom. We believe that a zombie community won't be free until we are in control of our lives, until we are able to decide for ourselves who we want to be, right? What we want to be, and what we want our future to be, right? Good. Okay. Second one. We believe that the OZs, come back a bit. Okay, let's come back a bit. Okay. Because they're working it out, right? You know, Z and T, right? Both together, coming back out to the people, trying to figure this out, trying to put something down that everybody can gather around and rally around, right? Okay. We want to be free of racism, of sexism, homophobia, and all kinds of injustice and oppression. Good. We believe that the OZs use racism and oppression to keep us down and to keep themselves in power. And so we're going to fight that. Good. Okay. Point 3. We want to put a stop to all zombies hurting each other and stop all beefs between zombies, right? We believe that when zombies fight each other and put each other down, that's what the OZs want, because it's easier to control us when we see each other as the enemy and not the OZs. We believe that when zombies are united and when they defend themselves against oppression as a family and as a community, they can and they will gain freedom, right? Love it, says Z and T. We want freedom, right? So Z and T then, right? Go out with the points and all the rest of the point forms, right? That's 1, 2, 3. All the rest of the points talk about, right? Reflect, what all the zombies, right, in the community have talked about, right? We want free health care, right? We want free access to dental care. We want to be free of homelessness, right? We want to be able to grow our own food, in control of our own lives, right? We want land, right? We want to be free of hunger, right? We want to be free of poverty, right? We want to be free of wars, right? We want to be free of oppression of all kinds, right? And of all forms, right? And those are the points, and it starts to go down like that, right? So then Z and T then take that, go out on the street, right? And give it to the people, the zombie people, right? Everybody's gathered around, Z and T are reading off the points, right? Introducing themselves as the Zombie Defense Party, right? Follow us, right? Join us, right? Introduce, right? The logo, right? So everybody knows, right? And what folks stand for, right? What Z and T stand for, right? What the party stands for, right? And then what you get is then you got people gathering, right? Suddenly people are starting to wake up a little bit, right? There's not so much biting and barking, right? Start to wake up a little bit, right? People are kind of curious, right? And so there are questions, right? The questions that come out, right? Are questions that sort of also mean you get a sense, right, that now that everybody's waking up, right, becoming woke, right? Okay, so zombie comrades, right, are saying things like, okay, so how do we fight back, right? You've got the points, I get that, but how do we fight that, right? What are the ways in which we can come together, right? And Z and T, say, look, one of the ways in which we come together is that we join us, right? And when you join us, right, we think differently, right? We talk differently, right? We relate to each other differently, right? We relate to each other and in love. So like when we talk about comrades, right? It means that I'm going to defend you, right? And you're going to defend me. I stand by you against any kind of oppression. You stand by me, right? We are partners, right? In the struggle for freedom and liberation, right? And we talk about each other as sisters and brothers, right? And we understand, right? Z and T both talking, right, together. We understand, right, that if we hurt our sister and our brother, right? If we understand that whoever I hurt is my sister, or I hurt this person here, this is my brother, I'm hurting myself, right? So that changes things in us, right? So then people start to get up, start to think, there's a waking up, right? A waking up going on here, Yeah, I can get that. I dig that. Yeah. So what about your Panther though, right? Isn't that kind of like really like aggressive, like kind of violent and this kind of thing? We're talking about love and everything. Z and T said, no, wait, no, the Panther, right? The reason why we chose the Panther, proud, right? And fierce, right? But the Panther doesn't hurt anyone. He doesn't hurt anyone who's coming to, anyone who doesn't harm it, right? Panther's a loving, right, being, right? It only begins to attack you if you are going to threaten it, if you are going to hurt it, right? And then its claws are going to come out. But before that, it's minding its own business, right? It's doing its own thing. It's living its own life, right? It's respecting everybody else around us, right? Respecting everything, right? Everything that we're related to, right? There's respect, there's love and respect there, right? But if you attack it, right? If you come at it, if you threaten it, those claws are going to come out. Those teeth are going to come out. And it is going to wipe you out, right? It's got anybody, any aggressor, right? Any OZ, right? That's coming at us, it's going to fight back, right? Right? It's going to defend itself. And it's going to defend the people, right? And everybody's like, whoa, yeah, I get that. I want to be that. I want to be a part of that. I joined that. I'm going to join that. Sister, brother, comrades, yeah, let's do that. Let's be that, right? Everybody's now rising up and everybody's awake, right? And everybody, what happens after that, of course, right, is that now everybody begins to think about how they can take control of their lives, right? They don't want to be dependent on anyone else. They are going to, if they're not going to get food to feed their families or work that makes you fulfilled and allows you to live your life in happiness, or there's an end to evictions and homelessness and war and oppression and discrimination and racism and sexism, they're going to do it themselves, right? They're going to take control of their own lives. They're going to build their own programs, right? They're going to build their own schools, right? They're going to have their own education systems, right? Their own education programs, because that's one of the 10 points, right? That they put down there, right? We want to have our knowledge of our own selves, right? Right? We believe that, education that we've had doesn't do that to us, right? So we're going to take control of our own education, right? Right? Everybody's alive now, right? That's what that does. And what happens is now, right? What you get there is a movement, right? That Yao moment, that's the Yao moment now to liberation, freedom, revolution, right? So at the end of it all, and at the end of that very first meeting, big gathering, right, in the neighborhood, Z&T stand there on that platform and they say to everyone, shout out to everyone, right? What do we want, right? And everybody says, freedom. When do we want it? Now. So let me hear you say that, right? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? Freedom. When do we want it? Now. Last time. One more time. What do we want? Freedom. When do we want it? Now. Right? So, that is the continuation. Z&T continued, right? Z&T's future. Right? Where Z&T go? So I have one last question. Not a question so much, right? But comrades, now you know how I now, what the meaning of that term, comrades now, right? So comrades, what would your 10-point program look like, right? What would be in it, right? You put a 10-point program together yourselves, right? What would be in it, right? What would you say, right? It would be about your lives, right? It would be in the same way, right? Thinking in the same way that Z&T have put together their 10-point program, right? So how about then, right? You put together your own 10-point program as a group, right? As a collective, right? Or you can bring in, have your own 10 points and you can bring it in all together, right? So it's all about, right? It's collective. It is all about you, right? You produce that, right? Just like Z&T, that 10-point program, Z&T just write down, right? What the zombie people are saying, right? And what the zombie people want, right? And what the zombie people believe, right? So I say, power to the zombies, because the zombies are getting a bad rap, and that's one of the other things here, right? What zombies talk about. There's a bad rap there. That's the media, right? Those are the newspapers and everything, right? So another thing, right there, is that we've got to tell our own stories, right? You can't allow other people to tell our stories. We tell them ourselves, right? I will say, much respect, comrades. Much love. See you again soon.